Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator, and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of DEI After 5. Okay, so let me share a little bit of background for you. When I first started the equity equation some years ago, one of my missions, one of my goals was to make sure that other women of color, Black women, were not going through the same things that I was going through when I was in a corporate space. And so I started doing a lot of coaching around supporting women of color in the workplace. Fast forward, what I realized in doing that was it doesn't really make a lot of sense to continue doing that work if the situation, the environment isn't changing as well. And so I did that pivot. But one of the aspects of that work, continuing to support women of color in the workplace, is still very near and dear to my heart. And I still do some of that work with the equity equation. But today I am talking to two guests who have been doing this work for several years, really making sure that women of color have the support, have the guidance, have what they need in order to be successful in the workplace. And so today we're speaking with Vanity Jenkins and Rachel Vicente, two women who are powerhouses in this space. So welcome, Vanity and Rachel. Brain just froze for a second. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having us, Sacha.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Vanity, I want to start with you and just talk a little bit about how you got into this work and a little bit about the program, and then Rachel will kind of jump over to you.
Sure. So similar to you, I started my career in the nonprofit sector and really started leading DEI initiatives at in a number of nonprofit spaces. From there, really wanted to expand my impact and wanted to do DEI work alongside organizations that really wanted to make monumental shifts in how they were operating, how they were thinking about culture, how they were supporting women of color. And so launched my own consulting company. From there, similar to you again, I started off as an executive coach. And so really coaching predominantly women of color. I did coach, some white folks and some men as well, but predominantly women of color, and started chit-chatting with Rachel about some trends that we were seeing with women of color in particular, and how they were experiencing the workplace, in particular, how a lot of leadership development was not geared towards women of color's inherent strengths. A lot of times when you go into a leadership development program, it essentially is teaching you how to think and act and be a cisgender white man, right? And so Rachel and I really wanted to deconstruct that and how we thought about leadership development.
I love it. Rachel.
Yeah, thanks. When I think about my own journey, I start way back in my work as a child. So when I was young, I actually was facilitating conversations around basically racism and anti-Semitism as a middle schooler to elementary school students. So I was always really curious about, what are the things that allow for people to be themselves, right? Like, I think 10, 11, 12-year-old Rachel would say, like, just be you, right? Like, what are the things that allow kids to be themselves? Obviously, now we would use that language as, like, what are the things that allow for people to be their authentic selves? And so from really young, I had this, like, deep curiosity around that question. How and who are the people who are allowed to be their authentic selves. And so that type of question had carried me throughout my life and then into my career, similar to you all as a nonprofit executive. And the thing was, I was answering those questions around like, there are mostly the people that are in power, right? So again, the cisgender white man, the people that hold power in their whiteness and their ability status and their gender, all of those things. And so I really thought critically about what is kind of my role in this, and really centering around intersectionality. Because also being a woman of color, I experience women of color having a vastly different experience. And so my prioritization in launching my business from a nonprofit exec was centered around how can I support companies to create spaces where particularly women of color can thrive. Because if we plan for women of color thriving, we're planning for all the other people to be able to thrive. And so like really this idea of planning for the margins. And so we already know, we'll talk a lot about what are some of the reasons why that happens. And then, in my partnership with Vanity, we worked together to create a fellowship experience, a particular leadership development experience for women of color called Authentically Me, to really solve a gap that we were noticing nationally around leadership development programs, right? That there's still not high quality, unique and tailored professional development for women of color that is centered in their authenticity. And so that is what we set out to do, and what we are setting out to accomplish.
There's so much alignment with what you all are saying and have experienced, and what I've seen and, experienced. And we chatted earlier around, I have a similar partnership working with, women in the similar space, because we saw the same gaps. And so it's so important that I think people realize these gaps are there. Like, they're not imagined. They're not just, I don't want to say, just circumstance, like, oh yeah, that there's this thing over there. Yes, it's this thing over there. And what are you doing to kind of close that gap? One of the things I said at the top, which I thought was which is kind of what helped me kind of reshape how I look at this work and doing this business, is for so many organizations, they'll throw women of color into these coaching programs, or say, you need to get coaching, as if they are a problem to be fixed. And what I started quickly realizing was there may be some challenges, right, and how we show up. And not that it's not us being authentic, it's because we are trying to fit into this box that was not meant for us.
For sure.
Right. And so we're not showing up in the ways that the organization wants us to show up, because it's inauthentic to who we are. So there's that piece of it. But then it's the environment continues to be toxic. The environment continues to not be prepared. The environment is not changing. And so you're asking women of color in particular to contort. This is like, it can visualizing like a gymnast just contorting their body to create this entity that is so much less of who we are. And then we truly get penalized for it on the other side of it. So, that was a whole long way of asking the question, so you all have been doing this for some time. And, again, we've talked about some of those disparities, but what have you specifically seen as some of those challenges that made you all raise your hands and say, you know what, no, we need to step in and do something?
Sure. I can start off. I think one of the things to how you frame the question, every fellowship at the end, we have women who share, thank you so much for this space, because now I know I'm not crazy. Thank you so much for this space where I can talk to other women of color who are experiencing this. And I know that it's not an isolated issue, or that, I am the only problem and I'm just not working hard enough, or, I'm just not fitting into this, this box where I can't show up and I can't find success in this atmosphere or in this environment. So I think that that's definitely part of it. I think another part of it is so many of our systems are still designed under the umbrella of white supremacy culture, right? And so I'm sure folks who listen to this podcast are familiar with the aspects of white supremacy culture, but those really show up in the workplace very, very often in how we do things. You know, one of the things that Rachel and I often talk about is worship of the written word, right? And so a lot of cultures of communities of color, we come from oral traditions, right? And so if I want to share an update with my manager in a voice memo, or if I want to share an update with my manager, through video or through another form, that should be okay as long as I am still doing what I need to do. However, oftentimes the person who knows how to use Excel and create all of these beautiful charts and spreadsheets is seen as more valuable, even if the work that they're actually putting into that document is not more detailed or is not more comprehensive than what I might have shared in a voice note. But because we believe that writing is a higher ordered functioning skill, or we believe that writing is more important than oral traditions, that person would get more value, or that person would be more likely to be promoted as having the skills that we're looking for at whatever said organization, instead of becoming more expansive and thinking about, what do I actually need my employees to do? What are the actual goals on this team? And as long as a person is reaching those goals, there should be lots of different ways that people can show up and express themselves. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is that we have such a narrow view and vision of what work is, of what good work is. Yeah. And, if Sacha did it this way, then you need to do it that way. And if Rachel did it this way, then you need to be exactly like Rachel. And, that takes away, that stifles creativity, that doesn't allow for multifaceted, comprehensive, complex solutions to things. And so when we peel back the layers of that, we often find that white supremacy culture is at the root of why people are having a negative experience. And so we focus a lot on unpacking white supremacy culture in our cohort. And again, not only for white folks, because people of color internalize white supremacy culture.
Absolutely.
As well. So we have to unpack the things that we have learned about what we place value on, because we've also grown up in this system as well.
Yeah. As you're talking, what I'm thinking through, and I do a lot of work around kind of like psychological safety. And part of that is between stages 2 and 3. So stage 2 is learner safety, right? How do I learn? How do you allow me to learn the nuances of the work, the environment, all of these things? And then stage 3 is contributor safety, right? How can I show my value? And one of the biggest mistakes that I think most organizations do is exactly what you spoke about. I'm going to create this environment where you can learn, you can go to classes, go to conferences, do all of these things, but then they come back to, well, we've always done it this way. Or I need you to do it like in this way. And I'm like, you just created this environment where people can learn and they can grow and they can do things in a way that's healthy for them, or they can take information in a way that is healthy for them. But then you're dictating how they share that information, which may not be aligned with who they are or how they express themselves. And so that's exactly what I was envisioning when you used that example, because I came from an environment where everything was a doc. Everything was a doc. Are you going to write a 1-pager for this? Are you going to write a 2-pager for this? Are you going to write a 6-pager for? And I was just like, can I just tell you what I need to tell you? Can I just say, right? Because I'm so excited about this idea. The process of me having to put that down into 6 pages, I was just like, I was about to say something bad. I was just like, no, I'm not going to give you my idea. I'm going to hold on to this, because it's gonna suck the life out of me to have to think of it in this way. So, I appreciate you using that example because it is a very tactical way that we can't show up as our authentic selves because of the environment that we're a part of. Rachel, tell me one of the things that you've really been able to push folks on, because Vanity talked about, how we also internalize white supremacy, even as women of color. And so what were some of like the ahas that some of the folks that have gone through, some of your fellows have gone through in this process?
Yeah. So I think one of our very first sessions is centering around what are your values and who are you at the core? And the thing that we really hit home for people is that being a values-driven leader, right? So making decisions about your values is oftentimes related to you being an authentic leader and being a fulfilled leader. And so we spend a lot of time really peeling back for people. What are the moments that they've been inauthentic? What are the moments that they have been authentic? And how has their values really showed up into the space? And what they will find, a lot of aha moments, is that they're really interrogating their current workplace and saying, wow, I am abiding by the values of my institution. So a concrete example is if an organization's value is like prestige or like quantity or things, and your value is just like, I really love teamwork or like being in community or community, right? We'll talk a lot about how those two could be in tension with each other and how they show up in tension, right? And then when we peel back prestige as a company or organizational value, it's often rooted in whiteness, which is bigger is better, right? To seem or deem more successful, you have to continue to grow. And so we're making a lot of connections around who are they and who do they want to be as a leader? How is your current environment really fostering that or not fostering that? And what are the systemic barriers that are contributing to that experience? And so that is really important as an aha moment where people are like, oh my gosh, I am so stressed out at work because I'm in misalignment of my values every single day, right? And so they are really leaving empowered, saying, the next place I work at, I have clarity about what I'm going to look for and evidence around something being values-based. And so I think that's one aha moment that they have. Similar to Vanity, like when we're marketing our fellowship, we literally say like, if you are looking for being in community with like-minded women of color, right? So that is often a really common one that they're looking for. Like another one is building confidence and clarity, right? Again, an example of how we really demonstrate that. We hear consistently about the value of just being in community. So one person's aha might be like, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize that, or I didn't even make that connection around XYZ. And so our session around white supremacy culture and internalized racial oppression is by far where many of their aha moments are, because we're building shared language and shared understanding to say things like, hey, one of the characteristics of internalized racial oppression is scarcity. It's competition. It's oppression Olympics. And they're able to say, wow, here is how I embody that in my work. Here is how others embody that in my work. And here is why this culture, again, is not set up for me. And so it takes from it moves our women of color and their experience from really personalizing it to step back and say, here is how the systems are setting up me in my leadership experience. And so again, it's shifting from a super disempowering mindset to a really empowering one to say, I have agency to engage in this way. I have agency to be at another place, be in a new role. And so that's the beauty of it, is that really giving people, we always say, like, you have the choice It's about you understanding what are the consequences associated with multiple of the choices. And so it's beautiful to be able to share, to see and to share, but those are some of the aha moments that I think are really connected to some of the barriers Vanity talked about.
Yeah. You know, as you were talking, what one of the most common aspects of white supremacy culture that shows up is rugged individualism.
Mhm.
Right. And did I strike a nerve? And so, you know, that's you think back, and I'm about to tell my age, but when you would see like the Marlboro Man, or you would see like going out on the frontier, and you know, that has now worked its way into the corporate space of a mindset of I have to do this on my own. I have to journey out on my own and do this, and no one else is going to help me or be a part of this journey, even though they are. And you know, and it's like you see how this I will step on people in order to get to this pinnacle, right? Because I did it on my own. I pulled myself up from my bootstraps in order to do this. Counterbalance that with we come from a place of community. We come from a place of, you know, helping each other and supporting each other and giving each other what you need in order to be successful. And if I don't have, you have because, you know, I have because you have, right? Like that's a very different mindset. And so to come from culturally a space of sharing and caring and nurturing to one that is the opposite of that makes it very difficult. And so that's that cognitive dissonance that constantly happens within the workplace. And so, you know, what you're talking about or what you're sharing is that distress that we go through culturally because we are told rugged individualism. We're told you have to do this on your own. We are told we need to get X number of degrees in order to be seen as valuable, right? We're told we have to go through this checklist. The checklist itself is white supremacy culture.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Right. And so it's how do you pivot out of that? And that's the work. And that is what's difficult. And so, you know, one of the things that I said at the top was it's so important to do this work because we have a lot to unpack within ourselves. But then you have organizations that are remaining the same, right? They still have their checklist. They're still doing all of the things that are causing harm, particularly for women of color. And so how do you all work with women to help them get back into those types of situations?
Yeah, so I want to share a couple of things in response to that question. The first is, so we have a whole session about playing the game, right? Because at some point or another, women of color are often told that we have to play the game. And oftentimes that advice comes from other people of color, whether they are our mentors, whether they're our parents, whether they are, you know, our managers or people who we respect. And so we start to unpack where that notion of playing the game comes from. And we really get deep into what are you actually saying when someone is telling you to play the game? What are they actually coaching you around? And oftentimes it's respectability politics. It is rugged individualism. It is essentially how to show up as close to white supremacy culture as possible as you can in that body as a woman of color, right? And so we start to unpack where those messages have come from. When have you played the game, and what did you lose? We often talk about.
Can we pause on that part? Not just playing the game, but what did you lose? Because it is not a win-win.
Never.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. That just
we ground a lot on our bodies because our bodies often tell us when we are doing something that is out of alignment. And so sometimes it shows up as high blood pressure. Sometimes it shows up as stress. Sometimes it shows up physiologically in your body when you are behaving in a way that is out of alignment because of advice that someone else gave you, right? And so we start to help women really sit with that and understand that, you know, we all have choices, and sometimes it doesn't feel like we have choices. Sometimes those choices are weighted. One of the other things that Rachel and I talk about is, you know, I am a single mom, and Rachel is not a caregiver. And so I didn't go full time in my business until I was 3 years in, whereas Rachel was able to go full time in her business as soon as she opened it. And that is because of different choice points that we had because of who we are individually, right? And so we don't say like, hey, you can go and be authentic tomorrow, right? We don't set people up with that notion, but we want to support them and remind them that you do have choices and you can plan accordingly because of those choices that you have. And so I think it's critically important for women of color to really understand that, you know, we're never going to tell someone, leave your job, right? That's a choice that you have to make. And we say that lots of times in our fellowship. But throughout this process, you may come to realize that you are not in alignment with your current workplace. Now, what does that mean? You know, how do you then go and find a job where you are more aligned? How do you decide what your next steps should be or what you want to do next? And we really let folks grapple with those questions, and we support them throughout the way, of course. And, you know, Rachel and I are also coaches. And so we also coach women who are in those situations sometimes. But I think one of the things that is really important for us to consider is, how are we creating spaces where authenticity is not only accepted, but where it's valued, right? And I think so many times organizations miss out on their full potential because they are stifling the creativity, the brilliance, the what could be at their organization because they are so used to having things in a straight and narrow way. You know, you have to follow A, then B, then C, instead of thinking about, well, if this is our goal, it doesn't matter how we get there as long as we reach our goal. And so we like to push organizations as well to think about, okay, you've had some women join this fellowship. How are you going to support them once they are back? They might be asking these types of questions. And I think the best example of that is we've actually done the fellowship for organizations. So organizations were able to have a set number of their women of color participate as long as there were no management lines, because we do talk a lot about power in the fellowship.
Yeah.
And then we were able to really set them up with going back to their organization and changing those systems and structures and processes so that it could be a more conducive atmosphere to authenticity.
I love that.
Sasha, can I add one additional thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing that I want to name that I think is super important, and Vanity touched on it, and I think it's just really want to be really clear for people that are listening. I'm a healing centered executive coach, and we talk a lot about, as Vanity shared, our body. And one of the things that I believe is a misunderstanding or misprioritization is that your success is not more important than your body's health and wellness.
Woo! Say it again for the people in the back.
So your success is not more important than your body's, your mental health and wellness. And why I'm saying that is because we have so many women of color that talk about their view of success really grounded in, again, more bigger is better, these titles, and they are sacrificing, and it's literally a sacrifice of their mental and well-being to get there. And I say, like, how are you going to be a CEO when you're dead? How are you, like, and people, we laugh about it, but when Vanity and I talk about our own experiences in corporate America, where I was seeing a neurologist, I was experiencing so much stress physiologically because of work. And I'm like, ma'am, I was like, girl, I'm over here at the doctor's
falling apart
for chasing and living into somebody else's dream, right? A company's goals. And the whole women of color are just right. And I'm thinking about our intersectionalities of both women and also people of color. We are extreme caregivers, and we want to do well, and we want to be good for people. We want to show up for people, but we're often pouring from empty cups. We're often not even realizing the cups are empty. And so one of the things I think is super important, and this is for organizations, and this is what we talk about when we talk to white women, men of color, white men that are supporting women of color, is that our physical and mental well-being is critical to us being able to thrive in an environment. Yeah. And for women of color to really say, cool, I can be, the managing director of XYZ, but if the cost is that I'm burnt out, I'm super stressed all the time, I'm not a great friend, parent, et cetera, then really, what is that worth? And that's why I think when Vanity said, like, what are we losing?
Yeah.
We have to really think deeply about our mental well-being, our physical well-being is the most important thing for us, the most important thing. So for us, we define success as how are we well first, and then thinking about our professional life second. And so that's just one thing I just wanted to hit like home, because when we think about organizations doing the work the same way, it's because they think about company goals first, people's well-being second.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that you pointed that out, and why I was having a little church sermon in my head, because it's just so much of what you're saying is a huge part of why I do the work that I do in the way that I do it, right? Mm-hmm. Saying in corporate space, I was rushed to the ER 3 times because of gastrointestinal issues and ulcers and hair falling out. Like, all of these things were happening. And I was just like, okay, something's got to give, and it's not going to be me. Mm-hmm. Like, this is non-negotiable. Amen. So I have to shift and change how I operate in this space. And one of the things, one of the reasons why, and we're going to get to it in a few minutes, I asked the question to every single one of my guests of, how do you fill your cup? What are the things that you do to take care of yourself? Is because it is so important. It's because I want that to be top of mind for people. Because if you're not thinking about that, and like you said, if you're giving from an empty cup, what are you really giving? Mm-hmm. Right. And so, like, how do you shift that so that I'm giving from my overflow? I'm filling my cup so much so that I'm giving you from my overflow, and you're still getting greatness. Mm-hmm. That's a different mindset. Yes. And so, I appreciate the work that you all are doing, because it takes a shift. And, as I said at the top, I shifted some of my business to working with the organizations, because I'm like, I got to make sure that the body is right before I try to transition this organ in here, because I don't want this body to reject this organ. Right. And so one of the questions that I always talk to leaders about, or not questions, one of the things that I make them think about is when folks on your team have ideas, or you're saying, brainstorming, I'm like, let them share their ideas first. Mm-hmm. Because you're probably going to get ideas you didn't even think about. You're going to see how people operate in their own authentic way. If you've created a space and environment where it's safe to do this, right? And you get to see, okay, let me tap into the beauty of this idea, or let me encourage this person in this other way. You show up as a leader very differently. Mm-hmm. And so when I do that work, it's so that when you all have done some work, you're now dealing with the leader that knows how to deal with a woman of color who's come back from one of these sessions feeling more authentic and aligned with who they are. And they're not going to be threatened
for sure
by that. Because that's the part that I know I went through when company paid for me to go through a leadership experience. And I came back like, listen, I know I'm the shit. I know that I'm great. Right. And however, that was a threat to the leader.
Yep.
Right. which then caused a worse situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the work that you all are doing. And I love that you all are having that pushback with those organizations and saying, what are you doing to now support this?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
that is so important.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do my question then, right? My pivot. Like, what are the things that you all do to fill your cups? All right, Vanity, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I am blessed to have really, really amazing friends who check on me and make sure that I am filling my cup, because I am that woman that you were talking about, Sacha, who will give and give and give and give and give until I don't have anything left. And so oftentimes they will make sure everything from, make sure I'm drinking my water every day, make sure I'm going on walks, to also making sure that I am really authentically celebrating and having time for myself. I'm an introvert, and so sometimes that means they pick up my daughter for me so that I can just have a quiet house with no lights on, no TV, nothing, just me and my bathtub and a glass of wine. So they'll pick my daughter up and take her out. She loves being around adults anyway as an only child, so she, always gets to do something fun. And I have to have folks that I trust take her, so that is something that I definitely do. I love to read romance novels when I am not reading things for work, so I do that. And then I try to be active. Rachel and I talked about the body, and it is really important to make sure that you are moving your body in whatever way feels comfortable to you. For me, sometimes that looks like taking a ballet class. I used to do ballet as a child. Oh, wonderful. So yeah, sometimes I'll go and do an adult ballet class. I do try to be in nature. And so sometimes that means, walking outside or taking a hike outside, things like that. But it really, really is critically important to take care of yourself. And I know people say that all the time, but I was one of those people who ignored it for a while. And as we've all shared, I saw the physiological impacts of that. And so really want to just put another cherry, another, exclamation point. Please, 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 women of color especially, please find time every day to do something for yourself, even if it's 5 minutes of meditation, affirmations. Do something for yourself every day.
Rachel.
It was so great to hear. Obviously, I get to work so closely with Vanity, but to hear what the ways that fill her cup are also just continuing to be inspiring to me. Yeah, when I think about filling my cup, I am a big, movement is medicine. And so I live in Miami, and I get to be in sunny weather very, very often, most of the time. Very blessed for that. And so some of that can just be like, I know based on what my body is telling me, just having a lot of body recognition, whether or not it's going to be a run, a run at the lake, or the intercoastal, or just a walk, right? Or I'm going to do some yoga, or I'm going to, meet up with my trainer. And so for me, it's literally thinking about how am I moving some of this energy out of my body to the universe, to the atmosphere. So I like literally visualize some of that. And I'm a huge decompressor. So I'm the youngest of 5. I was in a very busy environment growing up, and I live by myself, and I do a lot of executive coaching and leadership development, right? And so I have to think about, how am I taking people's, energy, how they're feeling. And so I have a pretty strict self-soothing regimen. And so every day, basically between about like 3 and 6, I am like either taking a nap, reading, resting, like literally just laying down. And I don't answer any phone calls. It's a way for me to give myself actually an intellectual break. I started this process in 2020. So, after experiencing a lot of my own health challenges, and my therapist was like, yo, you need, like, everyone's reaching out to you. Like, you need to create some healthy boundaries for yourself. And so that, like, just quiet decompression time is so critical. And so I think it's really, for me, thinking about filling my cup as a practice, right? Some days I'm really not great at it, and just giving myself grace and saying like, all right, today we're going to do better. And just figuring out what works for you. Some people are like a long shower at the end of the day, right? It's really personal. And so that is what I do to fill my cup, and just be in, community with people as well.
I love it. I love it. A little jealous of the weather.
Sorry. No, I'm just kidding. It is, we receive, I think it's like 75% sunny days every day. I mean, I lived in Chicago and in Boston. And so
total opposite.
And my feelings about life was also very different. So.
Yeah, I love it. All right. So Rachel, I'll start with you. If people want to get in contact with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. It's rachelvicente.com. You can also follow me on Instagram, RachelVicente _. You can find me Rachel Vicente on other social media platforms as well. And so that is how you can get in contact with me, and would love to connect with anyone that's interested.
Wonderful. Vanity, how would folks get in contact with you?
Sure. So you can go to my website, which is shiftedconsulting.com. You can also follow me on social media at Shifted Consulting. That's on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I am not on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. I can't keep up. But anywhere else, you can find me at Shifted Consulting.
Wonderful. Ladies, thank you both so much for spending this time with us. I think that there are so many pieces of information that you shared that women of color will walk away kind of thinking about and questioning themselves on how they're showing up and the support that they need. But then also organizations and leaders that are listening that have women of color on their teams, and something for them to be at least cognizant of as they are working toward being more inclusive leaders, and being mindful of kind of the challenges that are taking place. So thank you both for being here with us today. And thank you all for watching this week's episode of DEI After 5. As always, you can tune in on YouTube or any podcast platform, where you can find us every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, have a good one.